The road stretched endlessly through a sea of darkness, flanked by skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. Mia tightened her grip on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, eyes flicking nervously between the road and the flickering gas gauge needle. Low fuel. The red warning light glared like an evil eye, pulsing with the erratic rhythm of her heartbeat. She cursed herself for not filling up in the last town, a speck of civilization swallowed by the night hours ago. Her phone had lost signal miles back. No GPS, no way to call for help. Just her, the yawning blackness, and the growl of an emptying fuel tank. A sign loomed ahead, rusted and half obscured by vines. Gas! 1 mile. Relief washed over her, but unease lingered like a shadow. The gas station appeared, a ghostly relic from another time. Pale, flickering lights cast long, crooked shadows. One pump stood alone, its surface pocked with rust, hose dangling like a severed limb. She rolled to a stop, engine sputtering into silence. No attendant, no other cars, just the hum of buzzing neon and the whispering wind. Mia stepped out, the night air biting. Her footsteps echoed, lost in the void. She fumbled with the gas cap, shivering under the station's weak illumination. A sudden clunk behind her, a metal door creaking open. Mia spun around, breath caught in her throat. An old man emerged from the darkness, face half hidden beneath a grimy cap. His eyes were milky, unfocused. Need some gas? His voice rasped, words coated in dust. Yeah, Mia stammered, forcing a smile. Just passing through. His gaze lingered, unblinking. Ain't many travelers this time of night. Mia swallowed, nerves prickling. Just trying to get home. The old man nodded slowly, disappearing behind the pump. Moments later, the gas began to flow. Mia exhaled, tension easing, until she noticed something odd. The pump's numbers spun wildly, too fast, too chaotic. The smell, thick, cloying, wasn't gasoline. It was metallic. Wrong, she called, stepping back. The old man reappeared, but his eyes were different now. Sharp, glinting, predatory. Best get what you need, he croaked. Night's hungry. Mia's heart pounded. What do you mean? A slow, crooked smile split his face. Road don't end here, girl. Just keeps going. Eating. Taking. She yanked the nozzle free. Gas, or something like it, splashing onto the pavement. Her fingers trembled as she slammed the cap shut, eyes darting to the road. The old man just stood there, watching, a dark figure against the cold light. Take care now, he murmured, voice carried away by the wind. Mia jumped into the car, twisting the key with desperate force. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Without another glance, she floored the accelerator, tires screaming as she sped back onto the empty road. But the gauge needle didn't budge. It stayed glued to empty. Her stomach churned as a new sign loomed in the headlights. Gas! 1 mile! Identical to the last. Impossible. She drove on, hands slick with sweat. Minutes passed. Another sign, mile, followed by the same decrepit station, flickering lights mocking her fear. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, no, no. The old man stood beside the pump, expression unchanging. Lost, are ya? She screamed, slamming her foot down, speeding past. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. The darkness thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Another mile. Another sign. Gas! 1 mile. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. Her world shrank to the size of her headlights, chasing shadows that twisted and danced. The gauge still read empty. Always empty. A flicker in the rearview mirror. A shape, running on all fours, keeping pace with her frantic speed. It was human-shaped, but wrong, limbs too long, face stretched into a rictus grin. Her screams filled the car, mingling with the roar of the engine. She didn't dare slow down, didn't dare look back. Her phone buzzed suddenly, lighting up. Then a text flashed on the screen. You can't leave. The headlights flickered. The engine sputtered. She sobbed, fists clenched around the wheel. The road was infinite, an unbroken loop. And always the same sign. Gas. 1 mile. Mia's eyes burned, tears streaming unchecked. The shape outside kept pace, its eyes glowing hungry, fixated on her. The car jerked as the engine gave a final, rattling cough. Silence engulfed her. Darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. The figure approached, limbs bending unnaturally, face splitting into a grotesque smile. It tapped gently on the window, once, twice, each sound a death knell. Mia's screams echoed into the abyss, swallowed by the endless night. Somewhere in the shadows, the old man watched, a smile curling beneath his grimy cap.
Story number 2.
The road stretched endlessly ahead, a lonely vein through the thick forest. Kyle gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight. His gas gauge had been on empty for the past 10 miles, and now his car sputtered in protest. "Come on, just a little further," he muttered. Then, with a final choking gasp, the engine died. Kyle cursed, rolling to a stop on the side of the road. Outside, the night was impossibly dark, the towering trees pressing in. He checked his phone. No signal. Of course. He was in the middle of nowhere. A cold sweat slicked his palms. The only thing that cut through the darkness was his emergency flashers, casting eerie red flashes against the trees. Then, in the distance, he saw it. A gas station. Relief flooded him. It was small and run down, the old neon sign flickering weakly. It stood just down the road, almost like it had been waiting for him. Kyle hesitated. Something about it felt off, but he had no choice. He grabbed his wallet, stuffed his phone into his pocket, and stepped out. The air was thick, unmoving, and silent. Too silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves. Just dead, suffocating quiet. Kyle hurried toward the station, the gravel crunching under his boots. The closer he got, the stronger the smell of something rotting became. He swallowed hard and kept moving. The gas station was a relic from another time. Yellowed windows, peeling paint, an old-fashioned pump. The lights inside were dim, casting long shadows. He pushed open the door, a bell jingling above him. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something metallic. A single flickering bulb swayed above the counter. An old man sat behind the register. His eyes were milky, too pale, like he had been staring at something for too long. He didn't blink, just watched. Hey," Kyle said, clearing his throat. "Ran out of gas down the road." "You open?" The old man's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Oh, we're always open." His voice was like dry leaves scraping against stone. Kyle forced a chuckle. "Great. Just need a gallon or two, enough to get me to the next town." The old man didn't move, didn't speak, just kept staring. Kyle shifted uneasily. You got gas or not?" Finally, the old man nodded, slow and deliberate. "Round back. Pump still works." Kyle exhaled, grateful. "Thanks." He turned, eager to be out of that suffocating place, but as he reached the door, the old man's voice stopped him cold. "Careful, boy. You ain't alone out there." Kyle stiffened. Slowly, he turned back. "What?" The old man just smiled. But it was wrong. Too many teeth. Kyle's stomach twisted. He didn't say another word, just pushed open the door and stepped outside, the night swallowing him whole. The back of the station was even darker, the air heavier. The old gas pump stood like a rusted skeleton, a single bulb above it casting a sickly yellow glow. Kyle moved quickly, grabbing the nozzle. The pump rattled as he squeezed the handle, gas trickling sluggishly into the can. A sound came from the trees, a soft rustling, then a whisper. His breath hitched. He spun around, scanning the trees, nothing but shadows. Watching! He swallowed, forcing himself to focus. The can was almost full. Just a little longer, another rustling. Closer. Kyle's fingers trembled. He clenched his jaw, trying to stay calm. It was just his imagination. The old man had creeped him out, that's all. Then a breath. Right behind him. His stomach dropped. Kyle whirled around. Nothing. His chest heaved. He was losing it. He needed to get out of here. He yanked the nozzle free and turned. Something was standing at the edge of the trees. His blood turned to ice. A figure. Tall. Thin. Its head cocked at an unnatural angle, watching him. Kyle took a step back. His foot crunched on the gravel. The thing moved. Not walking. Gliding. It stepped into the dim light. Its skin was wrong. Too pale. Stretched too tight over its bones. Its mouth was too wide, lips curling into a grotesque grin. Kyle couldn't breathe. The thing lurched forward. Kyle ran. His heart slammed against his ribs as he sprinted around the station, the gas can swinging wildly in his grip. The air shook with something unnatural, like a deep, rumbling growl, but not from an animal. Something big moved in the trees. More than one. Kyle skidded around the corner, his boots slipping in the dirt. His car was just ahead. The old man was standing beside it. Kyle's stomach plummeted. The old man just grinned, his teeth too sharp, too jagged. "I told ya," he said softly. "Ain't alone out here." Kyle stumbled back. He could hear them coming. The rustling, the whispers. Hungry. The old man reached into his pocket, pulling out a key. He dangled it in front of Kyle, swaying it like a pendulum. "Trade," he said. Kyle's breath came in short gasps. "What?" The growling got closer. The old man's grin widened. "Trade places. I've been here too long." Kyle's pulse pounded in his ears. A shadow loomed behind him. A hand, long, bony, clawed, reached from the darkness. Kyle lunged forward, grabbing the key. The old man laughed, a dry, rattling sound. He fumbled with the key, hands shaking, eyes burning. The creatures were right behind him. He could feel them, their breath on his neck. The car door wrenched open. He dove inside, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Kyle slammed it into drive, tires screeching as he peeled away. He didn't look back. The old man's laughter echoed. The road stretched ahead, endless, swallowing him in darkness. Kyle risked a glance in the mirror. The gas station was gone. No sign of it, no old man, but the gas gauge still empty. And then a sign loomed ahead. Gas, 1 mile. Kyle's hands turned to ice, his headlights flickered, and in the mirror something smiled.
Story number 3.
The desert highway stretched endlessly before Jake, the asphalt cracked and shimmering under the moonlight. He had been driving for hours, the hum of his old Chevy the only sound in the vast emptiness. His gas gauge had been steadily creeping toward empty, and now the warning light glared angrily at him. Shit, he muttered. No gas stations for miles, no towns, just a black ribbon of roads slicing through a wasteland of dead trees and dry earth. Then, as if answering his silent plea, a gas station appeared up ahead. It wasn't on his map. Jake squinted. It looked old, too old. The single pump was rusted, the station's neon sign flickering weakly, letters half burned out. Last stop gas, the sign read. Something about it made his skin crawl. He should have kept driving, but his tank was empty. With a reluctant sigh, Jake pulled up to the pump. The place was dead silent. No wind, no insects, just a stillness that felt wrong. The door to the station creaked open. A man stepped out, tall and lanky, his face hidden under the brim of a greasy trucker cap. His eyes, when Jake finally saw them, were too dark, like pits that swallowed light. Need gas? The attendant asked, voice too flat. Jake cleared his throat. Yeah, fill it up. The attendant nodded, grabbing the pump. Jake shivered. It was too cold. The desert night was cool, but not like this. This was wrong. He forced himself to shake it off. Paranoia, just exhaustion. The old man pumped the gas, his hollow eyes never leaving Jake. You ain't from around here, the man said. Jake shook his head, just passing through. A long pause. The man grinned, revealing too many teeth. Not many people pass through here. Jake chuckled nervously, glancing at his phone. No signal. Figures. Yeah, well, just need to... A sound cut through the night. A deep, wet scraping. Jake froze. It came from behind the station. A slow, deliberate dragging, like something heavy being pulled through gravel. He turned his head slightly, trying to see into the darkness. The attendant didn't move, just stood there, still grinning. Jake's heart pounded. What was that? The old man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, letting the pump continue on its own. The numbers spun wildly, too fast, like the gas was pouring into a bottomless hole. Almost full, the old man murmured. Jake licked his lips, suddenly desperate to leave. Then the scraping sound came again. Closer this time. Jake couldn't help it. He turned fully, stepping away from the car, peering into the shadows behind the station. The light above the pump flickered. For just a second, he saw it. A figure crouched low to the ground, its limbs too long. Its head twisted at an unnatural angle, watching him from the darkness. The skin, if it even had skin, looked stretched too tight over a skeletal frame. It moved wrong, like it was learning how to walk. Jake's breath hitched. Then, in a flash, it scurried up the side of the building, too fast, too smooth. Jake stumbled back. What the fuck? The fuck? The attendant just smiled. That'll be $40. Jake stared at him. Are you kidding me? He hissed. What the hell is that thing? The old man's grin widened. Best not to ask. Jake's skin crawled. He fumbled for his wallet, tossing 2 20s at the man before rushing to his car. His hands shook as he turned the key. The engine sputtered. Wouldn't start. His stomach dropped. The old man was still smiling. Jake tried again. Nothing. Then a soft tapping on the window. Jake's blood turned to ice. Slowly, he turned his head. The creature was right there, grinning at him through the glass, its mouth stretched too wide. Jake screamed. He slammed his fist against the ignition. Finally, the car roared to life. He floored it, the tires screeching as he tore away from the station. In the mirror, the old man stood motionless, still grinning. And behind him, the thing crawled down from the roof, watching, waiting. Jake didn't stop driving. Not until the gas station was nothing but a distant speck in the rearview mirror. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. The highway stretched empty before him, the cop endless and dark. But then the gaslight came back on. Jake's heart stopped. Impossible. He had just filled the tank, his stomach clenched. He looked up. A sign loomed in the distance. Last stop gas, 1 mile. Jake's breath caught. No. The headlights flickered, the radio crackled, then a voice came through the static. You ain't from around here. Jake's hands went numb. He looked in the rearview mirror. A shape was sitting in the back seat, grinning.
Story number 4.
The highway was empty, a dark ribbon cutting through an ocean of trees. Jenna's knuckles were white against the steering wheel as she checked her gas gauge. Almost empty. Damn it, she muttered, stomach twisting. She had been on the road for hours, her GPS useless after losing signal in the middle of nowhere. The only light came from her headlights, the glow barely penetrating the thick fog creeping across the road. Then, through the haze, she saw it. A gas station. It was old. Too old. The building sagged under its own weight, its windows dark. A single pump stood in the dim light of a flickering sign that read, "Full service. Open all night." Jenna hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. But she didn't have a choice. She pulled in, gravel crunching beneath her tires. The second she turned off the engine, the silence swallowed her. She stepped out, the cold air biting. The place smelled off, a mix of rust and something rotting. "Hello?" she called. No answer. Then movement from the station's door. A man stepped out, tall, gaunt. His skin looked stretched too tight over his bones, his eyes hollow and sunken. His mouth curled into a grin that never reached his eyes. "Evenin'," he said, voice dry and cracked. "Need gas?" Jenna forced a nod. "Yeah, just enough to get to the next town." The man didn't blink. "Sure, I'll take care of it." She swallowed hard, stepping back as he moved to the pump. His movements were too slow, too deliberate. Her stomach twisted. She glanced at the station's door. It was open. Just a crack. A sign beside it read, "Restrooms inside." Her bladder ached. She had been holding it for hours. She hesitated, glancing at the attendant. His back was turned. "Be right back," she mumbled, stepping toward the door. The second she crossed the threshold, the smell hit her. Rotting meat, stale air, something foul and wet. Jenna gagged, covering her nose. The inside was worse than she expected. Dust coated every surface. The flickering overhead light barely worked. The restroom was at the back of the store. The door was slightly ajar. She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to turn around, but she stepped forward. The floor creaked under her weight. She reached out, pushing the restroom door open. The light inside flickered once, twice, then went out. In the darkness, something breathed. Jenna's heart stopped. She turned. A face was inches from hers, mouth too wide, skin peeling, eyes that weren't human. She screamed. The door slammed shut. She stumbled back, panting, hand clutching her chest. Then a scraping sound from inside the restroom. Something was moving. She bolted. She sprinted toward the exit, the floorboards groaning beneath her. As she reached the door, she saw something, a row of photographs pinned to the wall. She skidded to a stop. The pictures were old, faded, dozens of them, all of different people, all standing at this very gas station. Her breath hitched. Some of them were smiling. Most were not. Jenna's hands trembled as she reached for the nearest photo. The date written on it was 30 years ago, but the gas station looked exactly the same. The attendant in the picture looked exactly the same. A chill ran down her spine. Something was very, very wrong. She turned. The attendant was standing right behind her, grinning. Jenna yelped, stumbling back. "You shouldn't be in here," he murmured. Her mouth opened, but she couldn't speak. His eyes darkened. "Best finish pumping your gas," he said, voice like gravel. Jenna nodded stiffly, heart slamming against her ribs. She pushed past him, nearly tripping as she burst through the door. The night air hit her like a slap. The gas pump was still running, but the numbers weren't moving. She froze. The gas was pouring out, but it wasn't gas. It was black, thick, oily. Jenna choked back a scream. She tore the nozzle out, shoving it back into the pump. The attendant was still at the door, watching, waiting. She scrambled into her car, fumbling with the keys. The second she turned the ignition, she peeled out of the lot, tires screeching. The gas station flickered. For a brief second, it wasn't there. Just an empty, rotting building. Then, in the rearview mirror, the attendant was standing in the middle of the road, watching her leave. And then the gaslight came back on. Jenna's hands went numb. She looked up. A sign loomed in the headlights. "Full service, open all night." Jenna's breath hitched. Her headlights flickered. The radio crackled. And then, through the static, "Evening. Need gas," Jenna screamed.
Story number 5.
The road stretched long and empty under the moonlight, endless miles of cracked asphalt cutting through the desolate countryside. Mark's hands gripped the wheel tighter as his gas light blinked red. He had passed the last station 20 miles ago, convinced he could make it to the next town. Now his tank was bone dry. "Come on, just a little further," he muttered. The car sputtered, then died. Mark coasted to the side of the road, his breath slow and steady as he tried to stay calm. The darkness beyond his headlights felt thick, watching. He checked his phone. No service. Of course, he sighed. Then, as if answering his silent plea, headlights appeared in the distance. A sign flickered into view. Gas. 1 mile ahead. Relief flooded him. He grabbed his empty gas can from the trunk and started walking. The night was too quiet. No wind, no insects, just the sound of his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. The station came into view, standing alone against the black sky. It looked wrong, old, faded, like it had been abandoned years ago. Yet the sign glowed and the pump's digital display blinked, ready to fuel. Mark hesitated. His gut twisted, telling him to turn back. But he needed gas. The glass door to the station was cracked, but still intact. He pushed it open, a bell jingling somewhere in the dark. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and something rotten. Hello? Silence. Shelves stood half empty, products faded as if they'd been sitting there for decades. A single light flickered above the counter. Behind it sat a man, thin, gaunt, skin stretched too tight over his skull. He wasn't blinking, just staring. Mark swallowed hard. Hey, I need some gas. My car ran out just up the road." The man's lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. "Help yourself." Mark hesitated. The attendant's eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep. But he didn't have a choice. He nodded, turning to grab a gas can from the shelf when he noticed something. A wall of photographs. Rows upon rows of Polaroids pinned like trophies. Each one showed a different person, standing in this station, holding a gas can, just like he was now. Mark's stomach clenched. He took a step closer. Some of the pictures were old, faded, yellowing, but others were new, too new. And then he saw it, his own face, a Polaroid, freshly pinned, his breath caught in his throat. How? He had just walked in. A cold chill crawled up his spine. He turned slowly. The attendant was right there. "Best fill up quick," the man murmured. "You don't want to be stuck here after dark." Mark staggered back, nearly knocking over a rack of dusty snacks. Something moved at the edge of his vision. The other photographs were shifting. People's expressions, once neutral, were now twisted in silent horror. Mark bolted. He crashed through the door, gas can clutched in his white-knuckled grip. The night had turned colder, the air thick with the scent of something dead. The pump stood waiting. He fumbled with the nozzle, his hands shaking too much to steady it. The gas flowed, thick and black like oil. But he didn't care. He just needed to get out of here. Behind him, the door creaked open. He didn't look, didn't move, but he could feel it. Someone, or something, was standing there, watching. A whisper slithered through the night. "You're just like the rest." Mark's breath hitched. The pump clanked. The can was full. He yanked the nozzle out and turned. The attendant was gone. The station was dark, empty. The sign no longer glowed, like it had never been there at all. Mark's legs screamed for him to run, but his body felt heavy. He forced himself to move, gas can in hand, sprinting back toward his car. His pulse hammered in his ears. But then a new sign stood by the road. Next gas, 1 mile ahead. Mark's stomach dropped. He turned. The station was gone, nothing but an empty lot. A whisper slithered in the wind, not from behind him, not from the trees. From the back seat. Mark stopped breathing. Slowly shaking, he turned his head toward the mirror. A face stared back at him, grinning.
Story number 6.
The road stretched endlessly into the darkness, a thin strip of asphalt surrounded by miles of nothing. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, and the only sound was the hum of Ryan's engine as he pushed his car forward through the lonely highway. Then, the gas light blinked on. "Shit," Ryan muttered. He had passed the last station over an hour ago, and according to his GPS, the next town was still at least 30 miles away. A cold unease settled in his gut. Then, as if answering his silent plea, a gas station appeared. The sign was old, flickering weakly. Grandview Gas, open 24 hours. Ryan exhaled in relief and pulled into the station, his tires crunching over gravel. The place was eerily quiet. No cars, no people, just a single rusting pump standing under the dim glow of a flickering light. He stepped out, rubbing his arms against the sudden chill in the air. The station looked ancient, like it had been abandoned for decades, but the pump still worked. Ryan swiped his card. He tried again. Great, he muttered. The door to the convenience store was slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. The inside was dark. Ryan hesitated, every instinct telling him not to go in, but he needed gas. He pushed the door open. A bell jingled softly. The air inside was stale, thick with dust. The shelves were lined with faded products, cans of food with labels from another era, candy bars long expired. Hello? No response. Ryan walked toward the counter where an old register sat covered in grime. Behind it, a doorway led into the back of the store. A faint scraping sound came from the darkness beyond. Ryan froze. Hello? He called again. The scraping stopped. A long, suffocating silence followed. Then the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming toward him. Ryan's heart pounded. A figure emerged from the darkness. A man, or what used to be a man. His skin was paper-thin, gray, and sagging. His eyes were clouded, unfocused. His mouth twitched, lips peeling back into a grin that didn't belong on a living face. You need gas? The man rasped. Ryan stepped back, his body screaming at him to run. The attendant didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there, staring. Ryan forced a nod. Yeah, my card's not working. The man's grin widened. Cash only. Ryan swallowed hard. He fished out a few crumpled bills and tossed them onto the counter. The attendant's fingers were wrong. Too long, too thin, as he picked up the money. Pump's ready, he murmured. Ryan didn't say thank you. He turned and walked out, feeling the weight of the man's stare pressing into his back. The air outside felt colder. Too cold. He hurried to the pump, grabbed the nozzle, and started fueling his car. Then a sound echoed across the lot. A whispering, low, indistinct. Ryan's breath hitched. He turned toward the store. The attendant was gone. The door was wide open now, and the whispering was coming from inside. Ryan's hands shook as he yanked the nozzle out, spilling gas onto the ground. He didn't care. He needed to leave. Now. He jumped into his car and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. His pulse slammed against his ribs. He turned the key again. Nothing. A shadow moved in the store's doorway. Ryan's breathing grew ragged. He locked the doors and fumbled for his phone. Shh. No signal. The whispering grew louder. Something was walking toward him. Ryan refused to look. He slammed his hand against the ignition. Desperate. The car roared to life. He floored it. The tires screeched as he tore out of the lot. In the mirror, he saw them. Figures standing in the station's doorway, watching, grinning, too many of them. Then the gaslight blinked back on. Ryan's blood ran cold. Ahead, another sign loomed in the distance. Grandview Gas, 1 mile ahead. Ryan's breath hitched. No. His headlights flickered. The radio crackled, and then through the static, "You need gas?" Ryan screamed.
Story number 7.
The road stretched into the darkness, silent and endless. Claire gripped the steering wheel tighter, her stomach twisting as the gaslight blinked on. Damn it, she muttered. She hadn't seen another car for miles. The last gas station had been closed. Windows boarded up, looking abandoned for years. But according to her GPS, there was another one about 10 miles ahead. The night was too quiet. The trees lining the road loomed like black silhouettes, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. Claire tried to ignore the creeping unease settling in her chest. Then through the fog she saw it. A single gas station. It stood alone at the edge of the forest, its neon sign flickering weakly. Miller's Gas, last stop for 50 miles. Relief flooded her. She pulled in, the crunch of gravel beneath her tires the only sound. The place looked old. The windows were covered in grime, and the paint on the walls had long since peeled away. A single pump stood under the weak glow of a flickering overhead light. Claire stepped out, shivering as the night air bit into her skin. The door to the station creaked open. A man stepped out, tall, gaunt. His face was too pale, his eyes dark and sunken. His smile was too wide. "You need gas?" he asked, voice dry and raspy. Claire forced a nod. Yeah, just enough to get to the next town." The man didn't blink. "Sure thing." He moved toward the pump, his gait unnatural, almost like he was floating instead of walking. Claire swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. She glanced toward the station's window and froze. There were faces pressed against the glass, pale, motionless, watching her. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, and they were gone. Her heart pounded. She turned back toward the attendant. He was staring at her, still grinning. "Almost done," he murmured. Claire's skin crawled. She forced herself to glance at her phone. No signal. The numbers on the pump weren't moving. No gas was flowing. Her stomach twisted. She took a slow step back toward her car. You know what? A sound cut through the silence. A low, wet scraping from behind the station. Claire froze. The attendant didn't react. The scraping grew louder. Closer. Like something was crawling. Claire's breath hitched. Her legs screamed at her to run. Then, a hand slammed against the window inside the station. Pale, rotting, fingers too long. Claire screamed. The attendant laughed. Low, hollow, like a sound that didn't belong to something human. Best get moving, he said softly. Claire bolted. She yanked the nozzle from her car, gas spilling onto the pavement. She didn't care. She had to leave. She jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. Her fingers fumbled with the keys. The scraping grew louder. Closer. She turned the key. The engine sputtered. Died. The attendant was still grinning. Behind him, something moved. Tall. Too tall. Skin stretched over bones like it had been stitched together wrong. Its head twisted too far, staring at her with empty black sockets. Claire screamed. She turned the key again. The car roared to life. She floored it. Tires screeched as she tore out of the lot, this heart hammering in her chest. In the mirror, she saw them. Figures standing in the station's doorway, watching, smiling. Then the gaslight blinked back on. Claire's stomach dropped. Ahead, a sign loomed in the darkness. Miller's Gas, last stop for 50 miles. Her blood turned to ice. The headlights flickered. The radio crackled. And then, through the static, "You need gas?" Claire screamed.